welcome to lesson 4 of the work on the Second World War. This is our title for today. What was it like living in Britain during World War II? Write that down in your book or open a Word document and write the title. Please make sure you underline it and put today's date. Then you can copy down these keywords. Now have a go at these recap questions on the Battle of Britain that we did last lesson. Pause the video while you answer the questions. You don't need to write full sentences, just write the answers in your book. Once war began in September 1939, people expected the Germans to start dropping bombs on Britain. As you know, the Luftwaffe only started attacking British cities in September 1940, when they gave up trying to defeat the RAF and the German plan to invade Britain was abandoned. In these months, the British government took lots of steps to protect people in Britain from bombs. For example, you might recognise some of these pictures. We're going to look at them in a bit more detail on the next slide. The first one then is a picture of people putting up blackout blinds. These helped protect cities, particularly from raids by German aircraft, where if they blocked out the light that was coming from houses, it was much harder for the planes to see. So draw this diagram, this spider diagram, write the word blackouts, and then one sentence to explain how this helped to protect people. Gas masks were given particularly to children to mean that if there was a gas attack, so if the Germans dropped a bomb that released gas, poisonous gas, like had been used in the First World War, it would protect people from breathing it in. Another way the government protected people was asking them to build air raid shelters in their back gardens, and you could see the people in that picture were going into an air raid shelter in their back garden. We'll see later, for people who didn't have gardens, who lived in cities, some of them went into underground stations, tube stations, and slept there. And another way that the government were protecting people was the last one, sending children, particularly evacuating them out of the cities to the countryside, and we're going to focus on that today. We're going to think about how evacuation changed different people's lives and whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. There were lots of positives for children, particularly who were evacuated from cities to the countryside. Fresh air, better food, it was cleaner, and often it was the first time they'd left, so it was exciting. But there were some negative things too, being separated, sometimes being badly treated, and obviously families were being split up and parents were worried. They weren't always happy to see their children leave. It wasn't just children who evacuated. Teachers would go with their classes, particularly primary school teachers. Pregnant mothers would be sent with their younger children, and also disabled people were evacuated. Local people in the countryside sometimes were welcoming, sometimes they weren't so much. They didn't like having extra people to feed, and sometimes they treated the new arrivals a bit like servants or second-class people. We're going to look now at some sources, and you can use the information that we've just understood and learnt about evacuation to help you understand the sources. We're going to make some inferences. So here is a photograph that was published in a newspaper showing children being evacuated. Our question is, what can you infer from this about experiences of evacuation? Remember that infer means work out or read between the lines. So in your book, put a subheading, sources showing experiences of evacuation. And beneath this is source A, and we're going to write these two sentences. I can infer that these children felt, and then we're going to look carefully at the picture. How do you think these children are feeling? And put a word in there about being evacuated. And then, what was it in the picture that told you how they were feeling? So you might say these children look excited, and then we can say that we can tell that because we can see that they are smiling and that they're in groups together. They're looking at the camera. They don't look like they're sitting on the floor and crying. So write about the details that helped you to tell that they were excited. Same thing again with source B and source C. So read the sources and you're making an inference, working out. So use the same structure again for source B and source C. How do these people feel about evacuation? For source C, you'll need to do the two people separately. And then source D and source E. Source E is quite difficult, but if you look very closely at the right hand end of the bench, these tiny children, you can see that one of the girls is crying. So you might be able to see there, infer from that how these children might be feeling. Okay, once you've done that, can you write a paragraph explaining what you think, how you think people experienced evacuation? What have you found out from the sources, from what you know about experiences of evacuation? We're going to think now about the usefulness of sources. How useful is a source? So here is another source. This is source F, a government photograph showing evacuees in the countryside. This is 1939 at the beginning of the war. When we're thinking about usefulness, we need to look at the content of the source. What is in it? What can we see? If it's a photograph or a quote, if it's a written source. Then we need to think about whether it is accurate. Is it exactly what we know about? So we need to use our knowledge to help us explain. So the knowledge that we've got from the sources we've already looked at, and the information that we wrote down as well in the spider diagram. We might want to think about whether it's typical. Is this something that we think lots of evacuee children did, or is it something that hardly ever happened? Here's an answer that shows where this student has written about the content and how they've used their knowledge. So spend a minute just reading this, because you're going to do your own one of these in a minute. Another thing that we need to look at when we think about how useful a source is where it came from. And for this, we look at the caption. So the caption is the writing about the source. And here we can see the caption there after where it says source F. So when you think about who produced the source and why it might have been produced, what the purpose of it was. And then thinking about how that makes the source useful to us as historians in understanding about evacuation. And here again is an example answer, and you can see highlighted who's produced it. So it's taken by the government, and why did they produce it in green, and then why it's useful in blue. So pause the video and read through carefully. You don't need to write it down, just read through. Okay, another part of the experience of the war then was the bombing of Britain by Germany. So those first months there was very little bombing, as we know, but then it did start in September 1940. And you can read the information there and see the pictures. The picture at the bottom shows obviously a tube station, people sleeping on the platform and the tracks. They stopped the trains and people were sleeping there, and you can see the kind of destruction of houses in the top picture. So read these facts before you move on to the next slide. Okay, so we've seen, and you may want to go back, skip back through the video to the previous slides about usefulness. Now it's your turn. So now you know a bit about the Blitz. Use your knowledge to explain the content of source G or H. Think about the purpose of the source by looking at the origin. So that would be the part in the bold text, because that's the caption, and then make sure you talk about the usefulness. If you're in top set or set 2, you can do both. If you're in set 3 or 4, you can choose one of these. Remember to think about how useful this is, why it was made. Was it made to convince people, or was it made to be true and realistic about what was really happening? So pause the video while you're looking at these sources and writing your answer. And last of all, review your learning again by writing one or two word answers to these questions in your book. Well done.